Hello and welcome to Chapter 3. We are going to talk about biopsychology. So, what is biopsychology? It includes both biology as well as psychology and how they intermingle. It looks at your genetics and how your genetics influence you not just behaviorally, but also physiologically. It also looks at the structure and function of the nervous system. It particularly focuses on the study of the nervous system known as neuroscience, which is becoming a pretty popular major in a lot of universities. How biopsychology differs from neuroscience is that it includes other features such as how your genes that you get or inherit from your parents influence you, along with how the nervous system interacts with your endocrine system. Researchers study human genetics to understand the biological basis that underlies different behaviors, thoughts, and reactions of humans. Some questions they might ask are why two people infected with the same disease would have different outcomes. Are there genetic components to psychological disorders such as depression? Or how are genetic diseases passed through family lines? There are genetic variations between individuals, even siblings. It begins at conception. A chromosome is a long strand of genetic information known as DNA. DNA is a helix-shaped molecule made of nucleotide base pairs, and in each chromosome, there's a sequence of DNA that makes up our genes. The gene is a sequence of DNA that controls or partially controls physical characteristics such as your eye color, your hair color, your height, your weight, your stature. A gene may have multiple possible variations or alleles, which is a specific version of a gene. A specific gene can code for hair color, and the different alleles of that gene will affect what your hair color will actually be. The genotype refers to the genetic makeup of an individual based on the DNA inherited from parents. Here, this woman is showing the observable characteristics, which is your phenotype. So it shows her hair color, her skin color. If she stood up, you could see her height, her build. Most inheritable traits are controlled by more than just one gene. In some cases, they're known as polygenic traits. Other traits are controlled by just one gene. Alleles can be dominant or recessive. And you'll see here that the purple flower is the dominant, and that actually showed in the phenotype, where the recessive did not. Heterozygous is consisting of two different alleles, and homozygous is consisting of two identical alleles. Punnett squares, so here's a cleft chin, and the Punnett square shows here, it's a tool that's used to predict how genes will interact in the production of offspring. So the capital B here is the dominant, and the lowercase is the recessive. When a pair contains a dominant allele, you'll expect a cleft chin, which is shown in this figure. The Punnett square is shown here again. If two individuals mate, for example, and they both are heterozygous for the allele associated with PKU, their offspring will have a 25% chance of expressing that phenotype. Some mutations can be harmful, like PKU, and some are beneficial. The gene-environment interaction is how nature and nurture work together. There are different ways to look at that interaction: range of reaction, genetic environmental correlation, and epigenetics. Range of reaction asserts our genes set the boundaries within which we can operate, and environment interacts with the genes to determine where in that range will fall. Genetic environmental is an interaction that asserts our genes affect our environment, and our environment influences the expression of our genes. And epigenetics is the study of gene-environment interactions, such as how the same genotype leads to different phenotypes. So if you have the same inherited DNA from your parents, which is the genotype, but it expresses itself differently in the different siblings, which would be the phenotype, that's epigenetics. On to neuron structure. Neurons are responsible for receiving and interpreting and then sending electrical chemicals into the rest of your brain and other parts of the nervous system. There are some structures that we will focus on, including the dendrite. The tree branch-like structure shown here is the dendrite. It's responsible for receiving information and then sending that across the soma or cell body. The purple-like structure is your nucleus. It's sent down the axon and will end up at the terminal buttons. The protective layer that looks like it's a little translucent is known as the myelin sheath. It allows the information to travel across the neuron a lot more smoothly. The synapse is here. On top is your presynaptic cell. Below is your postsynaptic cell. It is the end of the terminal buttons and the beginning of the dendrites. We all have neurotransmitters. We produce them naturally. Some of the ones we'll talk about here are serotonin, dopamine, neuroepinephrine, and these are all things that we occur naturally in our body. When we release neurotransmitters, an action potential can occur. The neurotransmitter binds to the applicable receptors. Once an action potential occurs, any excess neurotransmitter is then going to be reabsorbed within the presynaptic cell. Here you can see the process of the action potential. At resting potential, the sodium is more highly concentrated outside the cell. The potassium is more highly concentrated near the membrane in the intracellular fluid. Depolarization is when the membrane potential becomes less negative. It makes it more excited. Membrane hyperpolarization is when the membrane potential becomes more negative, and that makes it less likely to fire. Action potentials act on an all or none principle. The incoming signal is either sufficient to reach the threshold of excitation and fire, or it is not. Another visual of the action potential. There are a lot of drugs that you can take that prevent the reabsorption or reuptake of particular neurotransmitters. It'll cause them to continue to bind to that receptor and continue the action potential. One example is SSRIs that people are sometimes prescribed for anxiety as well as depression. It prevents the reabsorption or reuptake of the serotonin. So it has more that's available so it can continue causing it to react over and over again, which causes the action potential. As a result, it alleviates the mental difficulties associated with the anxiety and depression. Neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers of the nervous system. There's a biological perspective with neurotransmitters. If there's an imbalance in them, it can cause certain mental difficulties. For example, schizophrenia, the hypothesis is that if there's too little or too much dopamine, the individual will have positive or negative symptoms. Another natural neurotransmitter is dopamine. It's involved in reward, craving, learning, and addiction. Norepinephrine stimulates the nervous system. It helps with alertness as well as serotonin, mood, and sleep. Psychotropic medications help treat mental difficulties by restoring neurotransmitter balance. There are two overall categories of drugs. It's agonist and antagonist. The agonist drugs promote, mimic, or strengthen neurotransmitter activity. SSRIs, as well as another common drug that many of us have daily, which is caffeine. It works as an agonist because it promotes dopamine activity, which causes us to want to consume it every morning when we wake up feeling a little groggy. It can also work as an antagonist. An antagonist is a drug that blocks or impedes neurotransmitter activity. Caffeine works as an adenosine antagonist. Adenosine is the neurotransmitter that builds up throughout the day and tells you that you're tired. So when you first wake up and are feeling really groggy, you'll consume caffeine or possibly an energy drink. It will block adenosine from binding to its applicable receptor. Caffeine also stimulates your adrenal gland. And that's why you have alertness and why some people are sensitive to caffeine, or if they drink too much of it, they may experience some adverse effects such as anxiety. An agonist mimics or strengthens neurotransmitter activity, and an antagonist works by blocking a particular neurotransmitter activity. Parts of the nervous system. There are two overall categories. The central nervous system, which strictly involves your brain and your spinal cord, and your peripheral nervous system. When individuals have damage to their spinal cord, that information cannot be sent to the rest of the body. The peripheral nervous system includes all your nerves, which help you move and accomplish other motor activity. Your peripheral nervous system focuses on your nerves. We're going to break that down even further into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system includes all voluntarily control, such as moving your arms, your legs, walking, running, things that you're able to voluntarily control. When it comes to your autonomic nervous system, these are the things that are automatic, things you don't have to think about. For example, you don't have to tell your stomach to digest or your heart to beat. It does so automatically. Under the autonomic nervous system, we'll break it down into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. When we experience or perceive a threat, our sympathetic nervous system will kick in. It's known as the fight or flight or freeze response. We either fight the situation, run for it, or we may be so petrified that we freeze altogether. Once that perceived threat is taken care of, we then see our parasympathetic nervous system come in and calm us down. It is basically the rest and restore side of the autonomic nervous system. Onto the brain. There are two hemispheres, and there's a little strip of tissue that connects the two and allows them to communicate. Lateralization is a concept that each hemisphere of the brain is associated with specialized functions. So the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, the right hemisphere controls the left side. The corpus callosum is that little strip of tissue that connects the two hemispheres and allows them to communicate. The corpus callosum is where your language is largely processed in the left hemisphere. If I put something in your left visual field, that information goes to your right hemisphere for processing. If there's a removal of that strip that communicates the two hemispheres, then it's going to be really difficult, if not impossible, to say what that image is. But then as soon as you move it into your right visual field, it goes to the left hemisphere, and that's where speech production is processed, as well as comprehension is largely processed. So every single structure in your brain is there for a reason and is very important. You want to minimize damage as much as possible. There are three categories of the brain: the midbrain, forebrain, and hindbrain. Some other structures that we'll go over include the cerebral cortex, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland and limbic system. The cerebral cortex is the overall surface of the brain. It's associated with our highest mental capabilities, such as consciousness, thought, emotion, reasoning, and language, as well as memory and the four lobes of the brain that include the four lobes, which is the frontal lobe, temporal, occipital, and parietal. The frontal lobe is hugely important for higher level processing. Structures as the motor cortex, the prefrontal cortex, and Broca's area are all part of the frontal cortex. The motor cortex is involved in planning as well as coordinating movement. The motor cortex is involved in coordinating movement as well as your cerebellum, which is sort of like a mini brain. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for higher level cognitive functioning. It's very important for decision making, problem solving, and as well as judgments. If there's damage in this area, individuals can expect to have difficulties with impulsivity. One idea behind ADHD is that there is difficulty with the frontal lobe and maybe even the prefrontal cortex. Because for some individuals who have ADHD, there's an impulsivity difficulty as well as decision-making difficulty. An example of damage in the frontal lobe in the Broca's area is this example of Phineas Gage. He severed the frontal lobe from the limbic system, which is important because the limbic system is important for emotional processing. After his accident, he did recover physically, but he had difficulty with mental processing and emotional processing. The parietal lobe is on top of your head. When it comes to the parietal lobe, you can think of it as the sensory lobe because it processes a lot of your senses. The frontal lobe is really important. The parietal lobe, is really important for touch, temperature, as well as pain. The frontal lobe is really important for higher level processing. The temporal lobe is near the temple. It's not just for speech comprehension, understanding what people are saying, but also the auditory cortex. So overall, it's really important for speech comprehension. It's important to know that Broca's area is being able to say things, while Wernicke's is understanding what people are saying. So there's Broca's and Wernicke's. The occipital lobe is at the very back of your brain. It's crucial for vision. Although our eyes are at the front, underneath the frontal lobe, and at the front of our face, the overall processing is done at the very back. Processing information in the left visual field goes to the right hemisphere, and the right visual field will go to the left. The thalamus serves as the relay center for the brain. It helps with most senses, but it excludes smell. It's going to be processed up in the parietal, but the thalamus is usually important for relaying information specifically related to your senses. The limbic system. We have the amygdala, the hippocampus, as well as the hypothalamus. The amygdala is involved in processing emotions, specifically fear. So when you have that fight or flight response, your amygdala is involved. When you perceive a threat, your amygdala is involved in processing that fear. The hippocampus is hugely crucial for memory as well as learning, and in particular, spatial memory. Finally, your hypothalamus is important for regulating things like your body temperature, your appetite, and your blood pressure. The hypothalamus is involved in making sure you're at homeostasis, or making sure that everything is at an even state. The midbrain involves really important structures for dopamine production, including the substantia nigra, the ventral tegmental area, which is also important for dopamine. Another structure in the midbrain is the reticular formation, which is crucial for regulating sleep and wake cycles. And then the hindbrain includes the cerebellum, as well as the pons and the medulla. The hindbrain is the brain stem. It connects the brain to your spinal cord. Your cerebellum is crucial for things such as motor coordination, as well as memory, specifically focusing on muscle memory. The last section, we're going to be talking about brain imaging, so how you test and look for things that if you may have symptoms and you think something might be wrong in the brain. Techniques that involve radiation, magnetic fields, as well as electrical activity. Your most basic brain scan is a CT scan. It gives us an X-ray of the brain, and it's mainly used for showing tumors that are in the brain or seeing if they have grown over time. A PET scan is good to have because you either ingest or are injected with mild radioactive substance, which helps monitor changes in blood flow through different regions of the brain. It can help see which parts of the brain are more active, or just in general to see if you may have a hypersensitive or a lack of sensitivity when you're shown certain images or videos. MRI and fMRI use magnetic fields to produce an image of the tissue. fMRI allows you to see the changes in metabolic activity over time. It's really important to have an MRI and an fMRI for giving particular information to see that metabolic activity. An EEG are commonly used for sleep. They use them in sleep studies to see activity as well as brain weight. You'll see individuals wear these sort of caps. There we go, there's the caps. Like this young boy is right here. The caps help to see the amplitude and the frequency of brain wave activity. Again, it's commonly used for sleep studies. Lastly, we're going to go over the endocrine system. It's a series of glands that produce hormones that regulate normal bodily functions. The hypothalamus links the nervous system and the endocrine system by controlling what's known as your pituitary gland. The pituitary gland serves as your master gland that really ultimately controls the rest of the other glands and the secretions of them. A very important portion or structure of the endocrine system is known as your thyroid. It secretes thyroxine, which regulates growth metabolism as well as appetite. If people have difficulty with their thyroid, it can cause a whole host of difficulties. It can impact your anxiety, it can impact your growth, specifically your metabolism. If it's underactive, individuals may experience a weight gain as a result of an underactive thyroid. Appetite can be impacted. Your adrenal glands, as I mentioned, secretes hormones involved in the stress response. The difference between a hormone and a neurotransmitter is that hormones last a little bit longer. When you experience a stressful event, if you still feel a little bit jittery or anxious afterward, you can thank your adrenal gland for making you feel a little bit more stressed for a longer period of time. Lastly, we have the pancreas, which is crucial for regulating blood sugar. For those individuals who have diabetes, they have difficulty with their pancreas in secreting the correct amount of hormones that regulate their blood sugar. And last but not least, here are the major neurotransmitters and how they affect your behavior. So whether you're feeling good or feeling depleted, you can see how the neurotransmitters that naturally occur in our body and what different parts of behavior they are affecting. And that will do it for Chapter 3. Thank you for following along.